¿cuánto de retórica hay en lo que tú ves en la América Latina de los últimos 15 años? ¿Y cuánto de puesta en práctica hay con respecto, y estoy hablándote ya de la relación esta de un cambio de dinámicas entre la clase política y las clases, el pueblo, ¿no?
For instance, I think the role of women is changing. That the younger generation of women are taking a very different position in the society. I see them as being, many of them being professional, ambitious,
participación política,
and politically very, very active. So there's a big difference between talking with people under 35 and talking to people over 35. And the other big difference is, I think there's no question that let's call it the popular classes, the peasant movement, the indigenous movement, has to some degree been incorporated into the bourgeois neoliberal world in ways that was not true also maybe 15, 20 years ago.
Si es que se propone, porque se propone mucho como una de las alternativas la redistribución de la riqueza, es mi pregunta, si es que también hay que redistribuir el poder político.
Well, I think there's been some redistribution of income. I don't think there's been that much redistribution of wealth. And I think that in terms of the control of the means of production and the means of wealth, like banking, something, it's still highly concentrated. You do have some redistribution of income so that lower classes have more purchasing power. They have better access, I think, to some public services like education and health. So there's been some redistribution of that sort, but not of the means of production. And that carries over, of course, to political power, because those who control the means of production usually control political power.
Hay quien habla de hiperconsumismo ya. Lo que está ocurriendo es que nosotros como ciudadanos comunes y corrientes en cualquier país del mundo nos vemos involucrados en una dinámica constante, en un círculo sin vuelta atrás de consumir.
It's a crazy system. I mean, I was commenting in Sao Paulo, where I was sitting in a traffic jam for about 1 hour, that here you are in a city, the economic basis of which is that it makes automobiles, and then people buy the automobiles and they go sit in a traffic jam for an hour. If you cut the production of the automobiles, there's a huge economic crisis, and if you keep producing automobiles, there's going to be a huge environmental crisis.
Ahora, ¿cuál es la que pesa más? Como seres humanos, ¿qué hacemos en un momento en el que está en la balanza esto? ¿El riesgo ambiental o el riesgo económico?
Well, to begin with, the economic crisis is a crisis of capital, and it's possible to envisage a society which is not capitalist. For instance, if we stop producing automobiles in Sao Paulo, there will be a lot of people who will be unemployed. Then you kind of say, well, how can they be re-employed in other activities which are more socially useful than producing automobiles? But the trouble is there are a lot of those jobs which they might do which are not profitable. So we need a sector of society which is absorbing labour in useful tasks but which is not tied to being profitable. And that has to be constructed either by people themselves developing collaborative forms of production and consumption, or it depends very much perhaps on the state. But I think the more I look at the way in which states behave, the less faith I have in the idea the states are actually going to do it.
El Estado como tal nos ha dado a lo largo de los últimos 20 años, o la figura del Estado lecciones de que puede transformarse, de que puede recuperar poder, incluso gobiernos de una línea ideológica de izquierda o provenientes de una línea ideológica de izquierda que cooptaron una buena parte del poder político en América Latina, empezaron a darnos lecciones de que hubo giros, de que se podía hacer otro tipo de política. Sin embargo, hay muchos que ahora critican que desde el discurso de la izquierda se están reproduciendo vicios del neoliberalismo, se están reproduciendo vicios del mismo capitalismo avasallador de los años 70 y 80. ¿Qué piensas tú al respecto?
I think you go through these waves in which the social movements are very active and to some degree threaten the structures of political power. And what then sometimes happens is that on the backs of those social movements you get progressive political parties of the left coming to power in the state. So what does the left political party do when it gets power? It typically engages in some redistribution of income, but it does not interfere with the underlying structure of wealth. And it will often co-opt the leadership of the social movements into the state apparatus. So the social movements come down, and in effect, wealth, the wealthy class, keeps power, and actually then, with a weaker social movement, regains power. For instance, in Brazil, the Workers' Party came to power. There was some redistribution of wealth. Most of the social movements which supported the Workers' Party have become less vigorous, and the result is now that Brazil is moving very much to the right. I think you're seeing something like that here in Ecuador. When Correa first came to power, it was on the backs of a very strong indigenous popular movement. They come to power and they redistribute incomes. They don't interfere with wealth. Now the wealthy classes are saying, all right, the social movements are tamed, so now we can take power back.
¿Qué piensas de este momento específico? ¿Cómo tú lo ves en Ecuador luego de 8 años de este gobierno?
Well, I don't live here, so I'm not an expert. I just look at it from the outside, and what I see is that in many respects the state has offended some of those groups who helped it come to power. It has lost a lot of credibility, I think, with the indigenous movements. When this government came to power, there was a strong environmentalist movement that was in, but they have little faith in him after the Yasuni decision. So you see all of these groups who were behind him who are not very happy with him. And some groups have become very prominent in the opposition, like the indigenous people.
Ahora, tú provienes de un pensamiento marxista, provienes de dar un seguimiento profundo a los procesos, sobre todo de la nueva izquierda. ¿Podemos hablar todavía de ideologías de izquierda o de derecha?
Well, I think it is still useful to distinguish between the ideologies of left and right, but I think we have to understand that the conditions have changed and that the ideological argument between left and right has changed, so that what is a viable left ideology now is not the same as it was, say, 30 years ago. But a lot of people on the left are actually very conservative, so they have a very hard time giving up their old conception of what the left should be thinking. But conditions have changed, and a good historical materialist would change thinking in accordance with the changing conditions.
¿Cuál es la discusión que debe embanderar un movimiento de verdad, de vanguardia, progresista, de izquierda o quizás hasta revolucionario en estos tiempos?
Well, I think we have to clearly understand what it is to be anti-capitalist. And we have to have a very good argument as to why we should be anti-capitalist. Anti-racist movement is not necessarily anti-capitalist. The LGBT movement is not necessarily anti-capitalist. But I firmly believe that those struggles are very important to wage. And I think that the best configuration for the left is to seek an alliance with those other movements in terms of their anti-capitalism, and to try to spend time explaining to people why it is that if you are an anti-racist, you should also be anti-capitalist. But I think the left has often lost sight of what it means to be anti-capitalist. So, for instance, in my last book, I spent quite a bit of time trying to explain what it means to be anti-capitalist.
¿Cómo tú, David Harvey, practicas en tu cotidianidad una vida anticapitalista?
I like to eat good food and drink good wine. But otherwise, I live a very simple life. My daughter complains that I'm a major source of unemployment for the textile industry because I live on my own now, and I live in a small studio. I don't care about money. So, for example, I'm working here with this organization, Senadet, I have no remuneration. Which is very different from the people who are working for Yachai, who are earning $16,000 a month to do what I'm doing for nothing.
¿Qué piensas tú de la academia en este momento y cuáles son sus deficiencias en relación con la comunidad?
Look, the university is a particular institution. It has a particular role in society. A lot of people go through the university. And what we teach people in the university does have an effect on how they approach the world. So there is in fact a form of class struggle internalized within the university over the question of what shall be taught and how shall it be taught. I spend a lot of my time actually fighting that class struggle to try to keep space open inside of the university where we can read and think about Marx. So, about 90% of the teaching in American university is corporatist or neoliberal. This is a very important struggle to be waged. I mean, the university is like a big factory for the production and reproduction of ideologies. And it's like class struggle fought in a steelworks, in a way, is no different from class struggle fought in the university.
¿Dónde está la labor del nuevo ciudadano relacionado con esta búsqueda de una nueva ciudad, de una ciudad más amigable, pero también desde un punto de vista político?
I think over the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen a lot of urban uprisings, of expressions of discontent. Most recently in Istanbul, but also in Brazilian cities. But before that, in London, everywhere. And then there was the Occupy movement. And so what we're seeing is the expression of profound discontent. And if you ask people what is the discontent about, more and more it's about the qualities of daily life in the city and the costs of living in the city are becoming more and more unbearable compared to people's remuneration. The cost of housing, rent, property prices. It's difficult for people to find decent place to live. And of course, there's constant fighting over everything from the banks charging you too much on your credit cards, the telephone companies stealing from you, so people, and then the qualities of public education and healthcare and so on diminishing because, so for instance in Brazil, one of the big questions in 2013 is why are we spending all this money on these big stadiums when we're not spending money on hospitals and schools and things. Yes, well, this is worldwide. Yes, and so I think there's a lot of urban anger right now, and my anticipation is that we're likely to see a lot more urban uprisings in the very near future.
¿Cuál es tu ideal de ciudad?
I don't have one image. I have several. I actually think we should be exploring diversity of urban structures and diversity of urban forms. And I think that one of the criticisms I have of capitalist urbanization is it looks exactly the same everywhere. And it's ironic because, we socialists are accused of trying to make the whole world look the same. We're the ones who like diversity and difference, adapted to their environment in ways. I mean, I think that, what you would want to do with Quito, because of its environmental situation, is very different from what you might want to do with, say, San Francisco or New York. Guayaquil. Yeah. So you've got to have a completely different approach depending upon where you are and the nature of the people, what it is that they want and need.
Estamos en un momento en el que debemos cuestionarnos, en el que ya se está cuestionando el mundo sus hábitos de consumo. ¿Qué es lo que tú, como David Harvey, desde la academia y desde la acción ciudadana cotidiana, puedes, recomendar o avisorar sobre los hábitos de consumo del ser humano contemporáneo?
Again, this is where urban redesign becomes absolutely crucial, because much of my consumption habits depend upon what I have to do in order to live in a particular environment. I mean, these days, to live in an American city, you need an automobile. But New York is the one place where you can live without an automobile. So I love the fact that I live my life without an automobile. And I wish we should build cities like New York so that nobody needs an automobile.
Nueva York, ¿cómo controla, por ejemplo, la emisión de gases tóxicos, la contaminación del aire?
Again, one of the things that we should do is to follow London in applying congestion taxes, which means that a large area of the city, if you go into it at certain times of day, you have to pay money. Capital has been very sophisticated about managing consumption with all sorts of things like advertising, fashion, and it's managed the consumer market into hyper-consumption extremely well. And if it can do that, then we can undo that. Into the bourgeois neoliberal world in ways that was not true also maybe 15, 20 years ago.
Si es que se propone, porque se propone mucho como una de las alternativas la redistribución de la riqueza, es mi pregunta, si es que también hay que redistribuir el poder político.
Well, I think there's been some redistribution of income. I don't think there's been. I think the role of women is changing. That the younger generation of women are taking a very different position in the society. I see them as being, many of them being professional, ambitious,
participación política,
and politically very, very active. So there's a big difference between talking with people under 35 and talking to people over 35. And the other big difference is, I think there's no question that let's call it the popular classes, the peasant movement, the indigenous movement, has to some degree been incorporated.
¿Cuánto de retórica hay en lo que tú ves en la América Latina de los últimos 15 años? ¿Y cuánto de puesta en práctica hay con respecto, y estoy hablándote ya de la relación esta de un cambio de dinámicas entre la clase política y las clases, el pueblo, ¿no?
For instance, not much redistribution of wealth. And I think that in terms of the control of the means of production and the means of wealth, like banking, something, it's still highly concentrated. You do have some redistribution of income so that lower classes have more purchasing power. They have better access, I think, to some public services like education.